Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast.
You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Blaney, and this is episode 65, a deep dive into the FCA. This is one for the Financial Services Aficionados out there in the UK, but hopefully there's some broader values for all listeners within this. And we've got Nigel Borwell from LeadTech returning to the podcast today to help us with this. Nigel, welcome back. How are you doing?
Hi, Daniel. Great, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So we started this call and we kind of had a quick chat about what we're going to talk through, and I think we very quickly realised there's tons of stuff in this. So we're going to just we're going to open it up. I'll try and structure it roughly, but we're just going to sort of see what happens and talk through this. And as I say in the title, deep dive into the FCA. Before we do that, let's just, for my benefit and for anyone maybe listening who isn't as involved in the industry as yourself, or can you just quickly tell us exactly what the FCA is and why it was introduced, what the kind of purpose of it is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in simple terms, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, are the kind of UK regulatory body for the financial services industry here in the UK. I guess they are a set of guardrails, really, and there to protect ultimately the consumer and to govern and provide a framework for businesses, financial services businesses, to operate. But I think there's definitely kind of a consumer theme there, and protecting the consumer is a big aspect of kind of what they do and what's on their radar. And
just like practically in terms of how it actually works. So you're as a lead seller, like, do you become registered with them? How does it actually go about?
As far as the FCA concerned, and again, I'm sort of simplifying this, but they essentially see businesses as either directly or indirectly authorised with themselves or not. I'm just trying to give an example of a lead generation company that's not actually authorised at all with the FCA. They would see them as an unregulated entity performing, I guess, unregulated activities.
Are unregulated activities illegal?
No, they're not. They're not. And lead generation, I guess this is a subject in itself, is essentially an unregulated activity. In terms of lead tech, we made the decision quite some time ago now to actually become directly authorised, and we are not alone. There are a number of companies that are directly or indirectly. And by the way, when I say indirectly authorised, what I mean is they are either an appointed representative or an introducer appointed representative, and basically they work with a principal firm who is ultimately responsible for their activity. Either way, they are on the FCA radar and they're visible and accountable, which is part of, I guess, the discussion today.
So there's just a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. So one is it difficult to become FCA authorised?
Part of the challenge is it is. It's not straightforward. I mean, to give you some context to that, we got our authorisation through last year, and we probably started that process almost a year before that, and we started those conversations nearly a year before that as to whether we should be authorised or not, and debated that internally, and took it as a strategic decision to do so. But yes, it took quite some time. And I know we're going to get onto the subject of Google changes last year and what that means and the consequences, but effectively that's probably made it even more challenging for companies to become authorised. I would imagine it might have made that waiting list a little bit longer.
And so once you are authorised, if you fall foul of whatever it is they want you to do, like protect the consumer in terms of financial advice and financial services, what happens?
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth me just kind of sort of diving a little bit into why we became authorised and what that looks like for lead tech. Essentially, we felt that it was the right thing to do. As I said, lead generation is unregulated. We didn't need to be at the time. That's probably changing, which we'll go into. But we just felt that we should be more accountable, and we felt that we could deliver more value for our partners, so the lead buyers, and our customers, the consumers visiting our sites. We felt it would be more reassuring to them. And we just felt that, strategically, it would give us a competitive advantage because a lot of our competitors weren't authorised. And there's clearly a trust element because lead buyers, and I'm talking about in our world, financial advisors and financial services companies, it's up to them to do their due diligence and understand who they're working with and really kind of do their homework as to the activity and the financial promotions and the messages that they're sending out, because ultimately the FCA would hold them into account.
So let's imagine that an advert is displayed on Google that misrepresents something. I don't know, they say, take out life insurance and you get £1 million a week for the rest of your life, whether you die or not. Be nice, wouldn't it? Let's imagine a lead generator has run that ad for another company that has that is FCA authorized, and so they're an appointed representative. If the FCA then find out about that ad and do something, what happens?
Well, they would go. I think the first thing is that kind of visibility of who is involved in the chain would be there, because the appointed representative would be on their register, and obviously the principal firm that's appointed that representative would be obviously directly authorised with the FCA. So the FCA would naturally kind of be able to track that back and go straight to the principal firm and just say, look, what's going on, and hold them to account. And obviously the principal firm would then be able to kind of go straight to the lead generation company and have that conversation. Ultimately, I would say that they would be told to make the relevant changes and everything would be okay as long as they did that. If that was repeated and the repeat offenders, then potentially the principal firm would have their authorization removed. So it really kind of puts the emphasis on that company, making sure that if they were to work with lead generation businesses, they really make sure that their processes are robust and they understand exactly what's going on.
Can the FCA issue fines?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and the fines can be really significant. I mean, it's worth pointing out, I know this subject's around the FCA, Simon, but it's worth pointing out that the Advertising Standards Agency is equally important in this as well. And I know they're very proactive around this subject. And, we've probably all seen kind of recent events where companies have received pretty significant fines. So it's not just the FCA. I would say it's looking at these other kind of bodies as well under the umbrella of compliance.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, if you're a lead generator and you are FCA authorized, you are then taking the responsibility for the generation of that data. And so it would be you that is accountable to the FCA, not the person buying the leads.
I think there's still risk for the companies kind of buying the leads themselves as well. I think just to kind of maybe have a look at the changes that are going to basically came about in September. So the changes to the kind of Google policy, which effectively, whilst it's a Google initiative, it was brought about by, I guess, collaboration with the FCA, and the FCA kind of applying some upward pressure to try get advertising platforms to take a little bit more accountability. And I think part of the reason why they wanted to do that is because during the pandemic and post-pandemic, pension scams were absolutely at an all-time high. And I think last year in the first 5 months, I think there's around about £2.2 million worth of pensioners' pension funds, so that their money was actually defrauded. And that comes down to, pensioners going online, looking for various different services and ultimately coming across an unscrupulous company. That really wasn't great for obvious reasons, really. It wasn't a great outcome for the consumer. So becoming a real problem. So ultimately that pressure resulted in Google applying this financial services verification rule, which came into force in September. And I think that was a really good thing. I think it's really just the start. And I do believe other advertising platforms will follow. I think the real issue behind this, and what we've seen to start to emerge since, Simon, is companies that aren't on the FCA register seem to be continuing to basically advertise on Google without any impact. And I know that because I personally had a look at various different companies out there that are on Google. And when you go on the FCA register, there is absolutely no evidence that they're authorized indirectly or directly with the FCA. So it kind of asks the question, really, who's signing off their activity and why they're doing it. You know, I think that's a huge problem, a huge loophole that needs tightening up.
So if you go onto PPC and type in, I don't know, release my pension or something about the pension stuff that you mentioned, there are still companies that have managed to find a way to advertise without any sort of FCA input.
Yeah, that Google, the financial services verification on Google, how it works is quite simply, obviously you go through a verification process, and you have to submit an FCA number. That's the point. Otherwise, they won't allow you to promote to consumers looking for financial services and products. It's that simple. And I think what's happening is, I don't know why it's happening and how it's happening, but essentially companies are continuing to promote themselves on Google, supply FCA numbers, but they're not actually appointed representatives. So that's an emerging thing that I'm starting to see, and it's a little bit of a worry because, you know, there's no transparency there, because ultimately, you know, you can't track them back. You know, there is no way of the FCA knowing who those companies are, and it has to kind of, I guess it really poses a question, you know, why these companies doing it, as I said, but what is the risk to the companies signing off these lead generators activity? I mean, you know, potentially the risk on these companies is huge, you know, and what is the risk around that, and why are they doing it? And I also think there's a lot of risk around the lead buyers as well. So I've seen cases where, I mean, I spoke to lead buyers that have told me that the companies they buy leads from are directly authorized. And when I've looked into it, they have produced a directly authorized number to Google, but ultimately they're not actually directly authorized. They may be an appointed representative, or worse, they might not even be an appointed representative. So I think there is some confusion out there. As I say, I think there's potentially some loopholes that need to be tightened up. I think this whole, sorry, go on.
No, you go on.
I think potentially some of this encourages the wrong behaviours, and I think it feels to me like it's more commercially led at the moment rather than consumer led.
Yeah, I mean, something I've noticed, just to pick up on a couple of things that you might have some more points on, is one, I've seen a lot of landing pages, for example, have come from ads under financial services on Google that say they're an appointed representative of a broker but don't name the broker. And that, I mean, so basically what this is like you're an agency advertising on behalf of a client, but you're doing it under a brand that you've created. And it feels like if the FCA's primary goal is to protect the consumer, the first thing they must sort out is who is a member of the FCA, or sorry, who is authorized by the FCA under that ad or that landing page or the entity that is coming through on. And the second thing is, having been lead generation a long time, I'm sure like you, Nigel, as well. Well, I know like you. Lead generation, and we've spoken about this before, is very rarely a one-to-one relationship, right? It's one to many. So you build it, especially if you build your own landing pages as a lead generator, you create your own brand, you drive leads to it, and then typically you'd have what we call a ping tree, which is a series of lead buyers. And then what normally happens is you have like caps or volumes, or you'll deliver it to the best person who can deliver the right thing, but you will have 3 or 4 buyers of that lead. If you're an appointed representative from one financial services buyer, that means you cannot work with any other company, right? Unless they also give you authorized, unless you're also an authorized representative for them as well.
Yeah.
Can you become an authorized representative for multiple companies?
I think it is possible, but I know the FCA don't like it. I think the AR and IAR kind of framework is geared towards that one-on-one relationship. As we know, the lead generation model, typically, not always, it can be that one-on-one relationship, but typically it can be, as you suggested, working with tens, if not hundreds of companies. I know we do, and that's one of the reasons why we decided to become directly authorized as a business. We felt it was future-proofing the business, because there have been signs in the industry that this is going to happen. The FCA have been talking about the risks around lead generators for quite a long time now, and I think they've been talking about trying to put pressure on the likes of Google and Facebook and Bing and so on. So part of the reason we took that strategic decision was to try kind of future-proof, I guess. But yeah, it's a difficult one, because I think what's happening now, so with the AR kind of route, I think the benefit of that and this framework dictates that there has to be that level of transparency. So that FCA number, even if it's an indirectly through the principal firm behind it, that has to be on the footer, I believe. Whereas what's happening now, as you suggested, companies are continuing to do what they do. They might allude to being authorized, they might not, and if they do, they're ultimately not actually transparent on the website as to who they're directly working with and who that authorized firm is. So it's kind of a little bit grey, and it's not ideal at all. But as I say, I kind of see the immediate issue is these companies that are not appointed representatives, therefore they're not on the FCA's radar, but they are getting their activity signed off, and it just doesn't feel right. I don't think it's good for the consumer. Who do they go to if there's a problem? Who do they complain to? And part of what we're trying to do here, being involved in this podcast, at LeadTech, we're really, really sort of passionate about, getting involved and trying to help kind of encourage the right type of behaviours in this industry and drive the right type of practices. And I can see some of this stuff going on, which is not good for anybody involved in the chain, really.
I think the problem is that it's something that we preach about a lot as well. It's the lack of transparency, isn't it? So if you, some of the problems you've spoken about is similar to problems you see with the ICO, and there's a couple of big things with it. One is at the ICO, for example, and I suspect it's the same at the FCA. They don't know what's going on at the coalface. They don't have someone who knows that industry from a lead generation perspective or lead buying and selling perspective inside out, that knows the loopholes, that can look under the nooks and crannies and find out where the filth is hidden. And the ICO is the same. I think that it can be a problem with these sort of governing bodies. They're well intentioned, and they've got the right moralistic point of view, especially from the consumer thing, but it's sort of lost if you don't have that person. I'd love to go into the ICO, for example. I'd love to see you go into the FCA and let's just go, right, we're here to clean up Dodge. I'll show you exactly where those stolen goods are.
Yeah, and part of me thinks that, I mean, have these steering groups, don't they? And part of me thinks that there is a place for that, and there's a bit of reliance on that as well. I think that they do want kind of to understand what's going on. I don't think, I think it's challenging for them. Let's just say that, and I think to have their eyes and ears everywhere is clearly not realistic. So. I guess part of kind of doing stuff like this, Simon, is a part of kind of just raising some of these points and seeing what happens. But as I say, I just think everybody involved, and I'm really kind of thinking about the companies signing off the activity when they don't really understand the level of risk they're bringing upon their own firms. I'm talking about other lead buyers that are maybe misinformed and misinterpreted around maybe the risk that still applies to them when they're buying leads, because they might be told that they're okay, the lead generators directly authorized or authorized in some way, and that might not be the case. But the main concern I've got is for the consumer, the end user, and ultimately that lack of transparency for them, because it's part of human nature, isn't it? That, and I think this is a bit that we really, really enjoy, that consumers naturally trust what they read and what they see. And I appreciate there's the other side of the fence where some consumers don't. But do we want a world where nobody trusts anybody, or do we want a world where you can? And I think it's important to try do the right thing, and know that as a lead generator and the role of lead generation businesses, I kind of think the role of lead generation businesses is really important. I think we are responsible to be to be putting the right kind of messages out there, and to be doing the right thing and providing the right experiences. And I think this is an important part of that subject. There are clearly companies out there that maybe don't put the consumer first, as they should do, and ultimately it's profit over what's right. So I think it's just important to kind of maybe flag some of these things.
Yeah, I think the thing with the FCA, I mean, maybe they're different to the ICO. I suspect they're not. I mean, I'm sure they're well intentioned, but from my dealings with those sort of regulatory bodies, I don't think they do necessarily listen. I think they're up here, like the idea it's going to sort of all drop down and filter down. And it does eventually. But it's a bit like politics, it's a bit like making changes. If you're a local council or something, it can take like 5 years before that pothole disappears, even though someone said, I'm going to get rid of all the potholes. But in which time, 1 million more people have been ripped off on a pension scam. So that, a lot of it's like the speed of change. And the reason the speed of change is so slow is they're not listening. They might be listening. They're either listening to the wrong people, or they're not necessarily like boots on the ground people in that particular regulatory body. And that's exactly like the case with the ICO. I'm absolutely positive. Whether or not it's exactly the same with the FCA, I can't believe it'll be much different.
No, I agree, and it's going to be really slow, isn't it? But I think talking about it, it's got to start somewhere, right? So I think talking about it, raising these issues, rather than letting them kind of go unsaid, can only be good. I've got the kind of grit between my teeth, because I think our business, I take our kind of role really seriously. I think, the business that we've built up, quite sizable now, and I think we've got a little bit of weight behind us in terms of maybe what we can do and what we can't do, maybe more than a smaller business. I don't know. There's certainly something in that, and I think if I can kind of make a difference, in the industry in any way, for the better, for the consumer, for the lead buyers, for other lead generation businesses, then I certainly will do. Maybe we'll just send a copy of the podcast to somebody random.
Just by being authorized, you are, Nigel. So you've already gone leaps ahead above. But the other big thing about this is, and I think this is important to point out, you have to be either, or apparently, an authorized representative on Google or FCA authorized to advertise financial services products. On all the other channels, social, native, affiliate, whatever else there is, telephone, you don't have to be.
No, you don't. It is just Google at the moment, but I've got no doubt these conversations are taking place, and I fully expect that other advertising platforms will follow. And when that will happen, I don't know. But I know that the changes that Google have made, and ultimately the work that the FCA has done and the pressure that it's applied to get that to happen, has been really well received by the general public. So, it kind of makes sense that they'll continue to kind of push for these things. And there may be other initiatives, I'm not sure, but ultimately, I think the FCA, if we start to look into a crystal ball and go, what does the future look like? I think the FCA are just trying to push lead generation companies to become directly authorized with the FCA. And do you know what? I actually think it's a really good thing, And I know you asked, well, what's that like for lead tech, and was it an easy thing? The answer is, do you know what? It wasn't easy. It's taken quite a lot of work, setting up all the processes and the oversight and compliance oversight and the governance. We had to change.
You're just trying to put everyone else off. No,
I'm sure they're all in the queue somewhere to become. I would expect them to be in the queue to become directly authorised, to be honest. But I'm just making the point that it wasn't straightforward, and we've set up teams of people that are checking the processes and giving us that oversight, so we know that the people that should be doing the checks are doing the checks, and we're checking that they're doing the checks, if that makes sense. It's sort of belt and braces approach, and that's taken quite a little bit of time and investment. So I'm kind of thinking that some of the smaller businesses might struggle, if I'm honest, to maybe kind of set some of this stuff up, but that is the way it's going to go in. I'm certain of that, and I personally kind of welcome it because, as I've kind of said before and alluded to, it's that transparency that's the problem, and by being directly authorised, it will certainly make lead generation firms fully accountable and transparent to everybody involved. So,
sorry, Daniel, you don't have much sense to speak, but I just wanted to mention one other thing, because I've been looking a bit into, I'm going to start this new little series that I'm going to do on LinkedIn, like ad hoc videos comparing landing pages from different verticals together. So I've been looking into a bit of, I was doing it around life insurance just because I chose to, but this is more of a background as well, which I think demonstrates some of the problems that the FCA might have. So let's say we're talking insurance, right? But I think this applies to most financial services products. You have the top end insurers, stuff like Legal & General, Vitality, big brands that everyone knows and loves or hates. And then below them, you have a bunch of brokers, which are effectively sales houses for the insurers. The difference is they can work with many, which is whole of market potentially, which they compare with everyone, or they have like a set panel of insurers that works level like 3 or 4, and then within that there's then advised or non-advised information. This is basically whether they've given you advice of whether it's what's the best product for you or not, and they've just given you a product. But what's strange is the advice isn't like a comparison site. It can be, they can do what's best for them and just sort of push you down that route. And so the insurers have to be FCA authorized, obviously. The brokers have to be FCA authorized. And then below that, you've then got the lead generators or agencies that are generating the leads that can then either go to the brokers at either level or to direct to the insurers. And let's make the point that all the insurers and all the brokers then also run all their own lead generation. The difference is the lead generators don't need to be FCA authorized, especially in every other channel at the minute, apart from Google, where they have to be either be an appointed representative, so they're effectively doing the advertising for either the broker or the insurer. And so anyway, so I just wanted to fully understand what the process is behind, because from what I understand, every financial service product operates in the same way. So the moment I was like, why is it exactly like you've said? Why don't they just make it that all the lead generators have to be FCA authorized? Because it's such an important cog in this whole wheel, because effectively they're all doing a kind of similar thing, which is the insurers sit on the top, and then it's sort of filtering down. They've got sales houses, and they're either buying the leads or the insurers are. It's, I think, like you mentioned, the thing for me is make everyone FCA authorized, and also make every single channel, social, native, absolutely everything that runs any sort of financial services have to have an FCA number, whether it's an appointed representative or not.
And I do believe, Simon, that's kind of where it's going. It's just going to take some time. And I think that change that happened last year with Google was really good, but I also think it's created some unforeseen issues here. I think this is kind of the point. I think it's created this situation where companies have naturally clambered to become authorized in some way, but that's taking time because of the sheer amount of applications that are going in, I'm sure, and the FCA have got their own challenges around that. And it's this kind of what's happening in the interim that's of real kind of concern. And as I say, to look at least half a dozen companies that are really, really active on Google, they must be spending a lot of money, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds, and not one of them is actually on the register, suggests that they've found some way of kind of, just satisfying the Google requirement of having an FCA number, but doesn't mean it's right, and kind of circumnavigates that FCA framework, which is all about having transparency and having that accountability. As you said, those levels, it's quite complex. The relationships between
did I miss anything?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, my area really isn't. I mean, insurance is not the biggest area of our business, but it kind of works very similar to the financial advice side. I mean, effectively, a lead generator really shouldn't be kind of, shouldn't be putting you towards a non-advised business, unless they're really clear about what that service is, and equally, the same with an advice type process. It should be really transparent. I think there are a lot of issues, kind of whether it's insurance or financial advice, that are very similar. But I think the real point here is everybody should be accountable in that chain, and the only way that's going to happen is if either the lead generation business is directly authorized themselves, or if they're working on a one-on-one relationship, then that kind of, I guess, those kind of levels are clear.
Do you know what I was? One thing I did is just as part of looking into this, because I've talked about like Tom.co.uk, and said, oh, look how cool brand is, and they've gone like down this really cool route and whatever, and the same with Dead Happy. But then when I took a step back and looked at it from all the stuff that I've just said, non-advised brokers, whole of market, summer market, blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, hold on. Maybe their advertising is really good because they've actually got the worst product. And so this is the only way that they could generate these leads. Because for me, there's two ways now that I look at this. I'm talking about, I think this applies to most financial services product, but I was looking at it specifically from life insurance. Well, I thought, if you're whole of market, the whole point is it's a comparison site. And we're going to get you the best deal. That's the best way to advertise this, right? If you're not whole of market, and we're just going to sell you whatever we've got, out back, you go, shit, we need to create a really good brand for this because we can't do the comparison. So it was quite an eye opener for me. I was like, oh shit, maybe it's a good brand, but actually maybe it's a good brand because the product's shit.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously one way of looking at it. And I know you've talked a lot about this, Simon. I know we're kind of straying away from the FCA piece, but as far as lead generation is concerned, there are a number of things that we all need to get better at. And I think moving away from that 101 model to more consumer-led building brands is one of those themes that I think we need to get really good at. And certainly, it's certainly not a pitch for Lead Tech this, but that's something that's really high on our kind of agenda. And one of the points I wanted to make is, I know we were talking about it earlier, these changes that are happening right now in financial services is great. It's a great start. But I think it's much bigger than that. Obviously, the FCA is just concerned with the financial services kind of industry. Lead generation is a bigger subject and goes across lots of markets in the UK. And I know we were both attended the kind of lead generation world, for example, this year, and we're starting to put some real kind of focus and emphasis on the industry, which is brilliant, getting us talking. But I do think there is a need for something kind of bigger, something to help kind of really drive some of this best practice and some of these conversations in a more structured way, maybe some kind of framework that we can all work towards. I think for now, having these conversations is brilliant. It's getting the right messages out there, isn't it? But it will be good to see something at some point, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I always
are you still there, Daniel?
I always say it's a sign of a good podcast where I basically don't need to ask any questions. I just set you up and leave you going. It seems to work quite well. And I think, to be honest with you, you've covered most of the questions that I've got set out anyway in one way or another. One question I do want to ask you, Nigel, you've been really diplomatic, I would say, in this call. But if I was you and I was speaking frankly off camera, I'd probably be quite pissed off.
Turn your camera off.
When I'm making all this effort to be authorized and doing the right things properly, and then I see other companies who aren't doing it and getting away with it, I would be annoyed by that. So what I want to end on, I want to say, if there's someone from the FCA listening to this, if we manage to get it in front of someone, speaking to them directly, what would you say to them?
I would say what you're trying to do is really good, but it's not enough. More needs to happen. There is a loophole allowing companies that are not authorized with yourselves to continue to promote themselves heavily on Google by providing an FCA number, and you need to go and have a look at how they're getting that FCA number and start holding companies to account.
That's a nice message. You know, it'd be great, Simon, if we could get someone from the FCA soon and sort of quiz them about it and put them to the sword a little bit and find out exactly how these people are actually doing it.
The problem is, and that I would love to be proven wrong about this, and if I can, I don't think there'll be anyone there who is at the coalface that knows enough that could actually, converse at this level.
Yeah.
It sounds right. I'm not meaning to be horrible. If there is, we could get them on the podcast. The three of us, they could be a fourth, and we could quiz them about it. But
I think trying to raise the awareness with, obviously we said with podcasts like this, Simon's great with your show, it's what it's about, but also trying to get some awareness in the media as well. I'm kind of keen to do that. I've got some contacts, and I think it's an area that lots of people are interested in it because we've all got a stake in this, and certainly the people that I kind of close to, likes of yourself and lots of the leaders in the industry, we're all really passionate about similar things, and ultimately the consumer and their best interests are at the heart. And I think we share that with the FCA. I know we do. So maybe that's what we need to kind of do. We need to kind of,
It's a really good point. Yeah. I think if it's, because ultimately maybe some of this vitriol against, it's not that bad. This talking about the FCA and potentially what they're doing wrong is maybe it's sounding like it's too commercial from us when actually it's really about protecting the consumer. And it's but because we're all commercial companies, we maybe don't express that clearly enough to them. But that's a really good point, Nigel.
Maybe that's a nice way to end it, actually. Maybe we can think next about how we can actually offer that help somehow, how we can maybe put them in the right direction, point these things out to them. And if we're on the same, we're after the same thing, maybe that's an angle we go down next, rather than my initial idea of bringing them on the show and attacking them. We actually have a positive discussion and see if we can move it forwards.
Well, if you manage to get them on, I'll be more than happy to kind of join that. That'd be interesting, I think.
Cool. We'll try it. Nigel, thank you for being a fantastic guest. That was a
welcome.
Really great episode. That was episode 65, a deep dive into the FCA.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.